Hello friends, here I am with next part of this story. I hope you all like the video and subscribe to my channel. So let's start the video with summary. Trust me, little one, immortality is a curse. If you are ever offered the chance to live forever, think very carefully before accepting. Take it from me, immortality is my curse. I have seen everything fall around me, and I curse the poor fool who think this is a blessing. Chapter 5, Home is where the heart is. And with that his guest finally left his domain, the man out of time watching them leave until they were no longer within his sight, no longer within his realm. He sighed as he walked into his cabin. Watching them leave is always the hardest, he thought to himself before he noticed that the hearth fire was burning strongly. A young woman holding a poking rod, prodding the flames to life. She turned to him and smiled. I sensed the hearth was missing family once Artemis arrived, so I thought I'd come see if I could make the flames burn brighter for you. Kurama raised her eyebrow as he looked at the young woman. She sat before the fire, gently smiling up at him and beckoning for him to sit by the fire. She had short, shoulder-length brown hair, with slight curls that allowed it to frame her tanned face. As the blond man moved to sit next to the woman, he noticed that in her eyes danced a fire that washed whatever they viewed in warmth and comfort. "Thank you for tending the flames, young one," he said as he took his place next to the hearth. "But tell me, those who normally come here are in need of something, guidance, a place to stay, or as of recently, someone to find. So, young one, what brings you to my grove?" he asked the woman, staring into the fire, watching the flames dance and curl into the air. The woman covered her mouth with a hand as a melodious laugh rang throughout the cabin. "Oh, trust me, I am far from young. I haven't even been allowed to be young ever since my younger brothers and sisters were born. But I did hear that you helped my mother with my problematic little brother while my father was being, well, a terrible father." She giggled out as she resumed tending to the fire, making the flames, a small smile on her face. Kurama nodded in acceptance. "Well, compared to your brothers and sisters, you may be the elder, but to me, you are but a little girl, in need of someone to speak to. Am I correct?" he said before making to stand. "Would you care for something to eat, something to drink?" he said, making his way towards the kitchen. The woman shook her head. "Oh no, I'm quite all right," she said as Kurama reached for a pair of glasses. "Oh come now, I can't just let a visitor come and not share in a drink or two," he said before looking over a bottle that was stored in a cabinet. "I mean, I'll need to drink this bottle of sake at some point, it's just been sitting in here for, I dunno, 3, maybe 4,000 years," he said before taking the 2 glasses and the bottle over to the hearth and sitting next to the woman. The woman sighed before giving the bottle a once-over, and then reached for a glass. "Oh, why not? I do not normally drink, but this seems to be a special occasion," she said as Kurama poured her a glass. He chuckled as he stopped pouring once the glass was half full. "Ah, that a girl?" he said before he filled his glass. "To the ever-flowing time that shapes the world and destroys it at the same time," he murmured as he raised his glass and downed the drink in a single sip, not even fazed in the slightest by the aged alcohol. The woman chose to simply sip on her drink, but widened her eyes and began to cough at its potency. "My, that is stronger than some of Dynasty's brews," she said as she reined in her breathing and nervously glanced at the drink. "How can you drink something so potent?" she asked as he filled up another glass and drank it down just as fast as the first. He sighed in content as he set the glass down. "Well, alcohol has never really had any effect on my system, and my taste buds have been shot for the last few centuries, so I can't really taste it, but I do enjoy the slight burn to it." The woman raised an eyebrow at him before she began to giggle. "Slight burn? I might say that was like fire going down my throat, and I should know, fire is a part of my domain," she said in amusement that he would call something that strong a slight burn. Kurama snickered at that and shrugged his shoulders. "I guess after shooting a few million fireballs and globs of lava from my mouth, I kind of lose a feel for that sort of thing," he responded with a grin. The two sat for a moment, the woman nursing her drink in her hands while Kurama gazed into the fire. "You know, I haven't quite gotten your name yet, unless you want me to refer to you as the pretty woman with the glowing eyes," he said as he filled his cup with the last of the potent drink. The woman smiled slightly before answering. "Please, I'm not that pretty. You should see my younger sister Hera if you want pretty, but that's you for the compliment either way. And my name is Hestia, by the way, the eldest of Kronos' children and all gods, and goddess of the hearth and home," she said, giving Kurama a nodding smile. Kurama chuckled as he finished the last of his drink. "Trust me, Lady Hestia, to me, pretty is pretty. And you're pretty," he said with a playful wink as he stood to place his glass in a sink and tossed the bottle in a waste bin. Hestia giggled while covering her mouth with a single hand. "You should meet Aphrodite. I think you two would get along swimmingly," she said between chuckles. Kurama raised an eyebrow before taking his place by the fire. "Oh really? Well, remind me to talk to this Aphrodite once I leave here." "If I leave here before you all fade," he said before mumbling the last part, his eyes glazing slightly as he looked into the flames once again. The two of them sat in awkward silence for a few moments before Kurama broke the silence. "So, you still haven't told me what it is you came here for," he said in a nonchalant one while laying onto his back next to the fire. Hestia sat for a moment, absent-mindedly poking at the flames to make them burn brighter before she answered. "I don't know really. I just felt something when your presence was made known to me after Artemis wandered in here. It felt odd, yet familiar at the same time, like a presence that was once always a part of my life, left for a long time, and then it finally returned," she said, not looking away from the flames. "I guess I just came here to see what exactly that disturbance was." Kurama looked away from the flame and to the goddess. "So, did you find what you were looking for?" he asked in a quiet tone, confused on what the goddess had told him. He may have only had a few visitors, but so far, each of them have had a specific reason to be there, be it something they needed to learn, something they needed to forget, or just a simple place to stay. He had been able to sense just what they needed, and worked hard to see their needs fulfilled. But he couldn't get a read on her. It was at first shocking that he could feel nothing from her. Hell, she had even snuck into his sanctuary without him noticing, and now he had no idea why she was there. Now it was just getting annoying because even she didn't really know why she was there. Not that he really minded. It was nice to have company, especially if they were of the beautiful goddess variety. But it was just, he didn't like being surprised like this. He had lived far too long and had enough with the strangeness of the world. So, he was rightfully annoyed that he now had a beautiful goddess in his house, with neither of them knowing why she was really there. Enjoying an alcoholic beverage sitting next to a warm fire. Why was he annoyed again? This sounded great. Hestia shrugged as she continued to look into the flame. "I don't know. I know I feel like the disturbance is close, but I can't exactly find it." She turned to Kurama, tearing her gaze away from the fire. "But I do have a question for you," she said to the blonde, earning a raised eyebrow from the man. "Oh really? Well shoot, what's up? What was that you told Annabeth? The will of fire?" she asked with an expectant look. "I've never heard that saying before." Kurama gave her a small smile before turning to the fire with a content sigh. "Where tree leaves dance, one shall find flames. The fire's shadow will illuminate the village, and one says again, tree leaves shall bud anew," he said before turning to Hestia. "As long as you fight alongside your family, your friends, neighbors and loved ones, as long as you fight to protect all that is important, you shall know true strength. The will to never give up, to never say quit. And the will to always fight for a better tomorrow. That is the will of fire." Hestia looked at him, and could actually feel the confidence radiate off of the man, his conviction and belief in his own words, and, most of all, it spoke to her. She was a goddess of family, so the belief that as long as you were with your family, and fought to protect them, was a belief she could wholeheartedly get behind. She let a wide smile grace her face as she thought over his words. "I think I like that way of thinking. I like it a lot." Hestia left the sanctuary a little later in the day, believing that if she stayed for too long that the other gods would become worried for her whereabouts. So Kurama walked her out of the grove and bade her farewell before returning to his cabin, and resume his meditation. Once he sat next to the hearth, he crossed his legs, placed his hands in his lap and breathed out a deep sigh. Well, it was interesting while it lasted, he mumbled to himself, happy that he had so many guests in such a short period of time. But now it was back to the monotony of eternity. Back to sitting alone, and back to waiting. Maybe someone will come by in a century or two, maybe they won't. Only time could tell. But it seemed he wouldn't have to wait too long, because the next time he opened his eyes was when he felt someone poke his cheek. He cracked a single, amused eye open and was treated to the curious smile of a young girl. "You were really out of it, Kurama," she said before sitting next to the hearth. At first Kurama was confused on just who this child was, until he looked into her eyes and noticed the same fiery spark that the goddess that had just left had. "Hestia?" he said in confusion. "What are you doing back here?" he said to the girl. No one had ever come back. They usually just stayed until he fixed what was needed, or the time they were there was sufficient for what they needed. She shrugged her shoulders and poked at the fire. "I dunno, the feeling never went away after I left, so I decided to come back, and after I showed up it disappeared." "Weird, right?" she said with a happy smile. Kurama looked at the girl before chuckling. "Is it me, or are you younger than I remember?" he said with a smirk. Hestia nodded to him as she poked the flame. I like to take this form most of the time. It makes me feel younger and happier. Also it helps for my approachability. You know, not all people would want to approach one of the eldest gods if they looked like they were super scary or powerful, right?" she said with a cheeky smile. Kurama chuckled and nodded along, also noticing that when she was in her younger form she also acted like she was younger, a little more carefree and a lot happier. "Well, I can't offer you any sake now that you went and got young on me. Would you like a glass of juice?" he asked with an amused smile as he moved towards the kitchen. "Orange, please," she called to him. He just shook his head and produced a carton of orange juice from the fridge that magically restocked itself whenever he closed the door. "I don't know. This could be fun," he thought to himself as he got his repeat guest a glass of juice. Chapter 6, Light in the Dark. "Well, I can't offer you any sake now that you went and got young on me. Would you like a glass of juice?" he asked with an amused smile as he moved towards the kitchen. "Orange, please," she called to him. He just shook his head and produced a carton of orange juice from the fridge that magically restocked itself whenever he closed the door. "I don't know. This could be fun," he thought to himself as he got his repeat guest a glass of juice. Everything was not going to plan. Zoe had been poisoned by Landon. They found Artemis holding up the sky, Luke had Thalia pinned, and Annabeth had no idea how she and Percy were going to defeat Atlas. It was a Titan against two kids, and he was showing them just how outmatched they were when it came to the divine. The Titan of Strength was looking down at them with a bored expression as he lazily spun his javelin in his right hand. "Come now, I thought you would be a worthy challenge, Percy Jackson. Or has Ares gotten weaker over the past few millennia?" he grunted out before slamming his weapon against the flat of Percy's blade. The black-haired son of Poseidon was launched through the air from the force of the strike, his blade, riptide, reverting to its pen form and landing on the other side of the mountain top. As Percy slid to a stop, a silver arrow was launched through the air towards Atlas, only for the Titan to catch the offending projectile without even the need to look at it. The Titan slowly turned his head to source of the attack with a bemused expression on his face. "Oh?" he said in amusement, seeing Zoe barely standing, her bow held loosely in her hand as she panted in effort, Landon's poison spreading quickly through her veins. "So the traitorous little hunter still has some fight left in her? Well, that is a surprise indeed. Why don't I fix that?" he said before groaning in frustration as a second arrow was launched at him. He batted it away with his javelin and began to stomp his way towards the girl, only for him to take a sharp breath in pain as ichor began to spew from his leg. "Grah!" he roared in frustration as he batted his attacker away, sending an invisible Annabeth careening across the mountain top with a pained scream. When she landed, her cap of invisibility flew off her head, showing that she now had a busted lip and was bleeding from a wound somewhere on her head, which was causing blood to trickle down along her temple. She coughed a few times from the rough landing, and began struggling to stand back up. The knife she had used to pierce Atlas' leg was lying a few feet away from her. The three-pronged blade was so far the only thing that had been able to even remotely harm the Titan and his stone-like skin. As she slowly crawled over to the blade, she looked up to see Percy re-engage the Titan, his blade clashing against the javelin with a brilliant spray of sparks. But his battle was short-lived as he was overpowered yet again by Atlas' superior strength, experience, and speed, as Atlas boot catching Percy in the stomach, sending him flying once again across the mountain top. Percy was panting hard from exhaustion and pain. He felt a good few pops from that last hit, indicating a broken, or at least cracked, rib, more than likely several. Leaning against his sword he stood once again, staring hard at Atlas' bemused smirk. "I'll give you this, Jackson. You really know how to take a hit. You're the only person besides the gods to ever survive this long against me. But I have had enough of this game. How about I put you out of your misery?" The Titan said as he began to stroll his way over to the son of Poseidon. Percy looked around for a way out, a way to fight back. There was a small pool of water. That would be enough to at least give him a fighting chance, but his only problem was that there was 50 feet and a Titan between him and the potential source of power. Not good at all. He mumbled to himself, a sense of dread seeping into his bones. Atlas looked down on the boy with a cruel smirk as he lifted his javelin. "Say goodbye, Percy Jackson," he said before he brought his weapon down. And to the sound of a terrified scream, blood was spilled on the top of Mount Tamalpais. "I swear, Hestia, how can this get better each time I eat it?" Kurama shuddered in pure bliss as he sat the large, now empty, bowl of ramen down onto the table. He was able to get a laugh out of the goddess, her using one of her hands to cover her mouth. "Oh please, yours is still much better than how I make it," an adult form Hestia said with a wide smile. She had been coming to the sanctuary, as she had decided to call it, for many years now. She would decide to pop in every now and then whenever she wasn't busy with her godly duties, which sadly were not as often as she would have liked. With technology now and city life being as popular as it was now, families spent less and less time with each other. But she knew there was still one place that she could count on to have family be a priority. Kurama was a very connected person. Once you spent enough time with him, and made it into a circle of friends, you were family. And it wasn't just the family friend you would meet up with every other year kind of family, she could feel it through her domain. He made people into his immediate family. Pure strangers could become a sibling if given enough time, which made Hestia very happy. If only more people were as loving. But that still left many questions about him open. Even after the few years she had gotten to know him, she had yet to learn anything new. All she had to go on was what the three children had learned. A tortured past, a long struggle, and a traumatically prolonged existence. Though, she did get a few good stories about her younger brother's time in the sanctuary. "No way!" she laughed as Kurama told her of Zeus' training. "Yes way," he responded. "Just try saying the word Senin Goroshi, 1,000 years of death, around him. See how he reacts." He chortled before standing and moving towards the front door. Hestia watched him walk away with a confused look on her face before he reached for the door and turned to her. "Wanna see something cool?" he said with a mischievous smile. The goddess smiled back at him and made her way to the door. Of course. The sun was setting outside of the sanctuary's cabin. Kurama led Hestia out to the main stump in front of the cabin and gestured for her to take a seat. The goddess did so as she watched Kurama's actions with a curious gaze. Kurama walked out into the center of the clearing and closed his eyes, standing perfectly still for what seemed like minutes. Hestia just watched with a patient gaze as she waited for whatever it was he was going to do. She waited until the sun was just setting past the trees. And then it happened. Kurama clasped his hands and an overwhelming power flooded the sanctuary, causing a golden aura to appear around the man. And all at once, as the sun passed by the trees, the wildflowers, the grass, and the tree leaves all shone a brilliant crimson gold, making the sanctuary itself seem as if it stood at the center of a grand hearth. And at its epicenter was a shining sun, filling the land with its warmth, nurturing the land itself with its gifted light. And the goddess was speechless as the lights finally died down with the setting sun. She could only mutter a single word. Beautiful. Kurama looked at her awestruck expression with a warm smile as the last of the light finally died down. The sun finally set. But he wasn't done. There was one last thing to do. He raised his arms out from his sides, a soft blue aura escaping his fingertips, once again flooding the sanctuary with light. But this was no grand flame, no warmth of the heavens. This was the light of the cool night, the calm dusk, and the fairy tale forest. The plants that once shone a brilliant gold, now blinked with a soft blue, a crystal light, the light flickering in and out amongst the trees, the flowers all facing the heavens, shining their cool light. And once again, the millennia-old goddess was stunned by the beauteous light that the man cast for her, and her alone. Kurama walked over to the goddess, a soft smile on his face. He watched her as she walked to a nearby flower, caressing it gently as its light blinked in and out, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. He walked up next to her, and the two sat down in the meadow of the sanctuary. Kurama looked to the goddess, and smiled even wider. Hestia, he started. Hestia looked to his eyes and blinked in shock at the vibrance they now had. Through the years she had known him, his eyes seemed to be dull, and lost of passion. But now they shone with a brilliance of their own, like looking into the pools of a deep ocean, a bottomless marine that swept up all within its gaze. "Thank you for everything," he said. "I haven't had anyone come back before, and to be frank, I thought that you would have left for good after the first day. It has been far too long since I've had someone to connect to like this," he said before taking her hands in his. "Thank you for returning to this old man when no one else would. Thank you for showing me a companionship I had long forgotten, and for giving me a light in my dark." Hestia listened to the man before her with widened eyes, her heartbeat quickening, nearly skipping as he spoke to her. She had never felt this before. What was going on? It frightened her, but at the same time excited her. She had never felt this euphoria before, this primal thought that brought her even closer to the man before her. And she waited unbated for the man's next words. "Hestia, he started to say, before his eyes widened, letting go of the goddess' hands and bolting to his feet. Hestia was shocked by Kurama's sudden movement, nearly squeaking out in surprise as he stood and took 3 steps away from her. She was about to rise and stop him from whatever he was about to do. She wanted no needed to know exactly what it was he was about to say. What was he so close to confessing? However, she was stopped when he pressed his index and middle finger to her forehead, and giving her a light push. "I am being called. It is finally time for this old fox to rejoin the world and stretch his legs a bit. I'll be back, Hestia," he said before he disappeared in a golden flash. Hestia just watched as he flashed away in shocked silence. She brought her hand up to her forehead and lightly touched where his hand had been, a crimson blush taking over her cheeks. "Just what am I feeling?" Annabeth watched in terror as Atlas raised his javelin to finish off the son of Poseidon. She needed to do something. Percy was going to die if she didn't do something. But her mind couldn't process what to do in time. Atlas had his javelin at its height, and was ready to swing down onto the son of the sea. She couldn't do anything. She was going to watch her, arguably, best friend die right in front of her, and she could do nothing. She rose to her feet, charging the Titan, hoping to be able to stop him, with her own body if need be. The voices in her head, guiding her on her path. "I never give up. I won't let a single comrade die. Give up, try to make me give up." She drew her 3-bladed dagger and held it high in the air. "Please, Mom. Poseidon. Anyone. Please let it make it." She prayed as she yelled with all her might, throwing the knife as hard as she could towards the Titan. And blood poured onto Mount Tamalpais. Percy watched as Atlas lowered his weapon. Time seemed to slow as his life flashed before his eyes. All in all, it kinda sucked. He always had the worst of luck. Being stuck with and having to deal with smelly gay for the majority of his life so far, getting kicked out of school nearly every year, constantly moving around, never actually getting to make any real friends. And now that he had some actual friends, he was going to die young. He would never get to see what was to be in the future. He was never going to get to grow up like he wanted. He was going to die. As the javelin neared, something caught his eye. It was for only the briefest of moments, but he saw what could have been Annabeth's weird 3-bladed knife fly right between him and the javelin's point. And that was all he saw before a blinding flash of golden light overtook his and Atlas' forms. Percy felt something warm splash against his face just before the light died down, but before he opened his eyes, he heard a voice he had no recollection of. "Oi, oi, oi. That hurts like hell, you know." A deep voice said in a cold tone, prompting the son of the sea to open his eyes in shock. Right in front of him was a tall, blond man, a white cloak with red flames licking the bottom hem fluttered before him. And the only thing that kept the boy from his immediate death was the left hand of the man, the javelin that was meant for him, piercing clean through the flesh of the man he did not know. Atlas looked at the man with pure rage. He had enough of people getting in his way. All he needed to do was kill that Spec Jackson and all would be alright. But here was someone new, completely unexpected, stopping his javelin with his bare hand. Out of my wa! The Titan began to roar in annoyance before something slammed into his stomach, making his entire body burst into pain. How do you like it? Huh? The man said just before the golden sphere of energy he slammed into the Titan's stomach exploded with a spiraling force that sent Atlas flying through the air and nearly off the face of the mountain. The only thing stopping him was the boot of the same man that sent him flying, slamming into his back with a satisfying crunch. Atlas, the Titan of strength, fell to the ground in pure pain, the spiral-shaped wound over his chest and stomach, pouring golden ichor onto the ground as he coughed up just as much from having his back nearly shattered. The blonde man pulled the javelin out of his palm and looked at Percy with a confident smirk. You okay there, Gaki? He said as the wound in his hand steamed and healed quickly. The only thing Percy could do was nod with his mouth gaping in shock. Annabeth looked at Kurama in utter shock. Did she summon him? And then, she remembered his words. When you are in your darkest hour, pray on this knife, and throw it as hard as you can, and then light shall appear to guide you through the dark. She did exactly that. She summoned the man that looked after her while they were on the run. The man whose life she had dreamed about all those years ago. The man who had given her her first, and best, weapon. And he was powerful. Kurama looked over to the blonde daughter of Athena and smiled broadly. Annabeth, it is a pleasure to see you again. But I hoped it would have been under better circumstances, he said before growling the last part, turning back to a quickly rising Atlas. The wounds over his chest slowly healing up after he repaired his back. You little shit. Atlas roared in fury. I will gut you before I give you the pleasure of dying. He roared as he charged the blonde, a new javelin flashing into his hand. We'll have to catch up later, Annabeth. I have a slight nuisance to deal with, he said as he brought up his left hand, clutching the blade the girl had thrown. Kurama let out a slow breath as a barely visible green aura coated the blade. As Atlas neared, he raised the blade and gave it a swing, the aura extending out towards the Titan. Atlas, however, wasn't a millennia-old warrior for nothing and sacrificed his javelin to redirect the extended blade enough so he could close the gap between the two. Die! He roared as he launched a fist forward with all of his might. Kurama reared back his bandaged arm, the appendage glowing brilliantly as he readied himself to send a punch flying. And when he did, the two fists collided, and for the absolute briefest of moments, the two were at a stalemate, until one finally gave out within the span of a second. Atlas' hand shouted after a moment, his fingers playing out in different directions as the blonde followed through with a strike, bending the Titan's arm back, snapping the elbow and completely dislocating the shoulder. And as he finished his punch, he quickly spun and delivered a devastating kick to the Titan's still healing chest, once again ragdolling the Titan across the mountaintop. You're weak. The Titan rolled to his feet as soon as he stopped sliding across the mountain and readied himself to charge back at the insufferable blonde, only for him to meet the blonde's fist in his face, sending him crashing into the ground. You're slow. Atlas coughed up his golden ichor as he slowly began to rise from the ground, only for the blonde's boot to press down onto his head, shattering the ground beneath him. And most of all, this fight is completely boring, Kurama complained. And here I thought I would be able to stretch my legs for once after all these millennia. But now I'm just completely disappointed, he said with an audible sigh. From her spot underneath the sky, Artemis watched in silent shock. The man she had once met several years ago had suddenly appeared right before Atlas could kill Poseidon's son, and then he proceeded to pummel the Titan with an impossible ease. Sure, she would have been able to defeat Atlas on her own, even in her weakened state, but she would have had to fight as hard as she could to do it. But he just destroyed a Titan, with seemingly no effort. Excuse me, ma'am, you wouldn't mind if I took this for you, right? A familiar voice said from her side, causing the goddess to look to the source. Huh? Was her intelligent response from a duplicate of the blonde man currently knocking the ichor out of Atlas. The clone of Kurama snickered at her confused expression and placed his hands upon the burden. I'll take that as a yes, he said before lifting the scar from her shoulders. The clone's face gained a strained look to it before a slight blue hue encompassed its hands. Doten, Kyuchigan no Jutsu, the clone mentally called as the weight of the sky lessened in his grasp. The clone gave a sigh of relief as he easily hefted the sky onto his shoulders and let the shocked goddess of the hunt escape. Go, the boss can handle the Titan, but it seems your hunter is in grave need of your help," the clone said with a slight grunt while shifting the sky's weight. All Artemis could do was nod and make her way over to her lieutenant. Back with Kurama and Atlas, the Titan was again being shown precisely how intimate his face could be with the ground. Kurama sighed in annoyance as he lifted the battered Titan up by the back of his shirt. "Alright, now this is just sad. You ready over there?" he called over to his clone, earning a nod from it. "Alright then, here he comes," he yelled as he physically threw the Titan through the air towards the clone. As Atlas approached, the clone let out a small breath and prepared to time this up. 3, 2, 1. "Now, Kairimi no Jutsu," he called as a plume of smoke enveloped himself in the flying Titan. Soon after the smoke appeared, it vanished, showing that the clone and the Titan of strength had switched places, the clone now flying through the air, and Atlas once again holding the sky. "New. Wait. Is this lighter than before?" Atlas mused as he began to curse the blonde man for trapping him once again, only for the flying clone to gain an evil grin. Not for long the clone cheered as he placed a hand on the sky. "Doten, Kajuken no Jutsu," the clone said before dispelling in a plume of smoke. Suddenly, Atlas fell to his knees, shouting in effort and cursing in pain. Kurama looked at his handiwork with a smirk while dusting off his shoulders. "Not bad if I say so myself. What do you think Anna Luke is at you?" Kurama began to say before turning to see a gobsmacked Luke holding a pinned Thalia to the ground, a blade pressed up to her neck. Kurama looked at the two, from the blade, to Luke, and back to Thalia, several times before a dark look appeared on his face. "Look. Just what have you done?" the blonde man growled in fury, his blue eyes turning red with a slit pupil. Soon his entire visage just screamed bloodlust, a light growl escaping the blonde man as he took slow steps towards the teen. And only one thing could come to Luke's mind as visions of his own bloody and gruesome death played over and over again in his head. Fuck. Chapter 7. The Maelstrom returns. Kurama looked at the two, from the blade, to Luke, and back to Thalia, several times before a dark look appeared on his face. "Look. Just what have you done?" the blonde man growled in fury, his blue eyes turning red with a slit pupil. Soon his entire visage just screamed bloodlust, a light growl escaping the blonde man as he took slow steps towards the teen. And only one thing could come to Luke's mind as visions of his own bloody and gruesome death played over and over again in his head. Fuck. Luke began to shake in fear as the blonde man made a slow approach. Thinking quickly, he pressed his dagger even closer to Thalia's neck. "Ah! One more step and I'll slit her throat," the blonde follower of Chronos said, a small trickle of blood appearing under his blade. Thalia glared up at Luke and winced slightly in pain. "When I get my hands on you, Luke, I swear no punishment in all of Hades will come close to what you'll feel," she snarled up at her one-time friend. Luke looked down at her and pressed the blade a little closer. "Shut up. I gave you the chance to join me, Thalia, but now it's too late. So just lay there and be my little hostage for now," the blonde snarled back before his eyes went back to the encroaching menace. Kurama kept up his glare, but the rest of his body language became indifferent, loosening to a near-relaxed state. "So, I see you still fell into darkness. The one thing I warned you of," he said with a little salt to his words, angered that his teachings went ignored. "What's it going to be, Castellan? Give up and take your punishment like a man? Or slit Thalia's throat and face my wrath afterwards? I highly recommend the first option. Trust me, the last guy I had to beat to a pulp in this situation both learned his lesson and lost an arm, and you seem pretty attached to yours," the blonde man asked while an aura of oppression erupted from his body, making it difficult for all of the onlookers to breathe. Percy and Annabeth unconsciously took a few steps back, even though it wasn't directed at them. They could still feel the bloodlust rolling off of the Immortal. The son of Poseidon looked to his friend and raised a slightly terrified eyebrow and pointed at the blonde. "You're gonna have to explain this later, wise girl," he said with a slight shake in his voice. All Annabeth could do was nod in response as the two looked back to the standoff between the traitor and Immortal. Luke tried to hide his fear by snorting at the blonde man. "Come now, Kurama, what happened to not letting hatred guide you? You seem to be acting on anger right now." He mocked the Immortal's words, earning a darker scowl from the man. "Ah, but Luke, you see, I've raised some kids before, Of course I wasn't the best father, but I did know how to punish them when they were being brats. Now, would you like to go over my knee? Or will a timeout do? 'Cause I'm about to break out the belt, and I don't think you'd enjoy that very much. While all of this was going on, Artemis was busy looking over her fallen lieutenant. Zoe was currently laying on the ground, her head resting on her mistress's lap. This is not good. The poison's already too far into her system. Artemis began to panic. Zoe had lost consciousness after Kurama appeared, leaving her unable to fight off the effects of Landon's poison. She didn't have any other options. She needed to do something she would hate herself for. Kurama, Zoe needs help, she called to the blonde, making him halt in his advance and turn towards the goddess. Seeing the downed hunter, Luke smirked at Kurama, knowing full well what he could do to escape. Oh? So what's it going to be, Kurama? Will you forsake the little hunter bitch to stop me? Or will you let me go to save a life? Come on, I'm waiting for an answer. I know little Zoe there can't wait much longer. Damn my heroic senses, Kurama grumbled before rushing over to Zoe. What's wrong with her? He asked as his hands began to glow green, running a diagnostic. She was poisoned by Landon. Artemis responded, earning a confused look from the man, who? Wait, not important. I need some room, he said with a shake of his head. Artemis looked at her lieutenant, and back to the man she asked to save her life. After a few seconds she reluctantly left Zoe's side and let the man do his work. Luke smiled as he got off of Thalia and made a break for it. Artemis watched as Luke ran off, unable to interfere without Luke directly attacking her or her hunters. But before he got too far away, a hand made of some sort of golden ore snatched the boy by his ankle, causing him to fall to the ground. What in Tartarus? He cried as he looked to the source of the hand, seeing it sprouting from Kurama's back. The man looked at the blonde traitor with an amused smirk. Please kid, you're a million years too young to trick me with this kinda shit. Now stay there while daddy thinks of a proper punishment for his bratty kid. He growled before turning his full attention to Zoe. Kurama sighed out in frustration before cutting off the medical technique. Alright. Let's get this over with, he mumbled to himself. He raised his bandaged hand up to the hunter's chest, right over her heart. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes, channeling his power into his palm. At the center of his palm glowed a small golden sun-like circle, and soon after, a pulse of power escaped from the Immortal, transferring into the hunter. Black symbols scrolled over Zoe's body, escaping from the man's hand. Kurama slowly began to lift his hand, revealing that the circle was placed on the girl's chest, and as he raised his hand, a green fluid rose with it out of the circle, following his hand's movements. The blonde Immortal breathed out a sigh of relief as the last of the poison escaped Zoe's body, forming a sphere roughly the size of a baseball in Kurama's hand. The sphere quickly hardened and formed a marble-like object before Kurama crushed it in his hand, turning it into dust. And as Kurama released his grip on the now destroyed poison, Zoe surged to life with a sharp intake of breath, which continued as she regained consciousness. Zoe! Artemis called, embracing her oldest hunter. The lieutenant's eyes widened in shock from the actions of her mistress, not entirely remembering what happened. Before Zoe could ask what was going on, her savior turned back to the captive blonde with a bloodthirsty smirk. He slammed his left fist into his right palm and began cracking knuckles. Alrighty then, what should I do first? He mused as he slowly made his way over to Luke. Said blonde was nearly shaking in what appeared to be fear, and that just made Kurama's smirk wider. What, Luke? Scared of what I'm about to do? Well, here's a hint, he began before stepping a little harder, cracking the ground beneath him. It ain't gonna be pretty, he said with an absolutely savage look in his eyes. But Luke wasn't shaking in fear, if his smirk could explain for itself. How wrong you are, you old piece of shit, he growled out as his body began to shake, a light glow emanating from his skin. He began to shake even harder as the glow brightened, until his body began to tense up, nearly screaming in pain. Kurama's eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of something hovering over Luke. It was some sort of specter, a ghostly image that remained cast in shadows. A dark laugh escaped the specter as the light coming from Luke's skin exploded out, blinding all within range. Kurama shouted in shock, getting caught up in the light. Once his vision returned, he could barely see Luke standing near the cliffside, Thalia held hostage in his arms again. Goodbye, Kurama. Better luck next time. He cackled as he fell over the edge with the daughter of Zeus. Thalia screamed as she went over the edge, fully believing she was about to die, only for a hand to lash out and grab her by the ankle, stopping her fall. She slowly got a hold of her shaking breath and looked up to see Percy holding onto her ankle, Annabeth and Kurama holding onto him by the waist, keeping him from going over the edge as well. Percy grit his teeth as he felt Thalia's weight tug at his shoulder, trying to heave her back up. Don't worry, I got you," he gritted out as Kurama and Annabeth dragged the two back up onto the mountain top. While the kids were getting their bearings after the explosion of light and the near-death experience, Kurama sat and looked over the edge of the mountain. Damn! Not a single sign of him, he grumbled to himself, seeing that Luke was now nowhere to be seen. He couldn't even sense his presence anymore, and that was troubling. Nothing escaped his sensory abilities. He turned away from the cliff and moved back to where the goddess of the hunt was. "So, anything else I could do to be assistance of?" he asked Artemis, earning a strange look from her. "Unless you can somehow teleport us to Mount Olympus, then I believe you're done here," she said to the blonde, her usual venom gone from her voice, replaced by a tiredness that seemed to convey just how much crap she was going to have to deal with soon, and the fact that she just held up the heavens for a few days. Though, she did quirk an eyebrow at him when an evil smirk played onto his face. "Actually, young miss, I can do exactly that," he said as he began to chuckle darkly. Before Artemis could question him, Kurama turned on his heel and spread his arms. "All right, kiddies. All who need to make it to Olympus in the next 0.001 seconds, grab onto my arms," he called with a grin. Percy, Thalia and Annabeth shared a look before looking back at Kurama. Shrugging, they stood up and latched onto his left arm. The son of Poseidon looked to Annabeth and repeated his earlier statement. "You, explain, full detail, later. Got it?" he said with a deadpan stare. All Annabeth could do again was nod, before looking to Artemis and Zoe. "Are you coming?" she asked the goddess and the hunter. Artemis' eye began to twitch as she grabbed Kurama's arm. "I was kidding, you ass," she grumbled, making Kurama laugh. "Well, whatever. Here we go," he yelled before a flash of light encompassed the group, leaving the top of Mount Tamalpais vacant save for the now silently cursing Atlas. Zeus, the king of gods, sighed once more as he watched the bane of Olympus do another flip in the sphere of water it was gifted, mooing happily as it swam around. He palmed his face for the umpteenth time before glaring at his elder brother, Poseidon. "Again, why is the Alpha-Taurus in my presence and not destroyed yet?" he grumbled. Like the thunder he rolled over. Poseidon looked up from his fishing magazine and shrugged at his king. "Well, I believe Mr. Underwood had a good reason, right?" the sea god said while shifting his gaze at the satyr in the room. Satyr froze on the spot and began to shake in fright. He stuttered out before bleating like a goat. Zeus just gave the satyr a deadpan stare before rolling his eyes. "Brilliant, he looks like he's going to keel over any second, and he's one of the quest takers." Now Zeke, where are your manners?" a voice said from behind the king's throne, making him and the other Olympians jump in surprise. Ares leapt from his throne, a sword already in hand as Hermes looked up from his phone, wondering what all of the commotion was about. Zeus spun around, trying to find the mystery man. "Who dares sneak into this chamber without P. He began to shout until he blanked and lost all of his anger. Kurama stood with the demigods and Artemis, giving the king a wave while smirking. "How y'all been, Sparky?" the blonde immortal asked before clapping a hand onto the god's shoulder. Zeus rose a shaking hand, pointing at the blonde. Sensei. He shouted before leaping back and landing on his hands and knees, bowing to the immortal. I'm sorry. He began to beg while repeatedly bowing to the blonde. And it was at this point the other gods were just staring in shock and confusion. The goddess of the moon simply shook her head in exasperation before making her way over to her throne next to her twin brother Apollo. The blonde god was watching his father repeatedly bow in a combination of amusement and shock. He barely registered his formerly kidnapped sister was standing next to him. "Oh. Hey Artie, any idea what's going on with Pops?" he asked, earning an exasperated shrug from his sister. He just nodded and went back to being shocked and amused. This lasted until the usually quiet and also Hestia bursted into laughter. reminding several of the gods she was still by the hearth in the grand room. Oh geez. You were right. She laughed out while she watched her youngest brother Bowen plead before his former teacher. Kurama turned to the brown-haired goddess and gave her the signature knee sky pose, tooth shine and all. Do I ever lie? He asked with a wide grin before turning back to the still begging Zeus. Now Zach, what was it I heard about you sleeping around and cheating on your wife? He asked with a false innocence that sent shivers down several of the gods' backs. Zeus shrieked in horror as he bowed faster and faster, fearing his former teacher's wrath. At this point Hermes was taking pictures on his phone while nudging Apollo aside. Hey, how much do you think this'll be worth in blackmail? He asked with a snicker in his voice. Demeter was idly feeding the officers pieces of cereal as she watched the free show, wondering if the blonde liked cereal. Dionysius was sipping on his Diet Coke, silently watching his father fall from grace in probably the best way possible. This'll teach him to take my wine from me, he grumbled before looking back to his wine magazine. Karma's a bitch. Thanks Nemesis. Hephaestus was too busy sharpening his spearhead to notice what was going on. And frankly, even if he did notice, he wouldn't even care. Aphrodite had a finger to her lips as she watched the display, wondering what she was feeling between Hestia and the new guy. Just before an evil smirk played onto her pretty face. Oh, I could have so much fun with this. Plus his whisker marks are pretty cute, she mused as she twirled a lock of hair between her fingers. Hearing this, Ares snarled as he watched his father make a fool of himself. Now I just want to kill this punk even more, he grumbled, his sword constantly changing form, trying to find the perfect counter for the blonde. Poseidon was rolling on the ground laughing as he watched his perfect little brother become a fool voluntarily. All the while, Hades was chuckling as he watched his brother beg and plead. I don't even know this guy. And I already like him, he chuckled out, resting his head in his palm, leaning into his throne to further enjoy the show. While all of the other gods were having their own reactions, Hera, the queen of the gods, was probably the least noticeable. All the queen did was raise an eyebrow inquiringly, wondering why Zeus was apologizing so much. Kurama walked up to the bowing Zeus and placed a hand on his shoulder. Zook, he started to say, before Zeus decided to interrupt him. Ah. It's Zeus, since he started before a fist found its way to the top of his head, planting him flat on the ground. Let me finish. Kurama scolded, leaving a large bump on the king's head. HHAI, sensei. Zeus called back, huge faux tears running down his face. Kurama cleared his throat before he began to speak again. He took a deep breath before slamming his fist into Zeus' face, sending the king flying across the room. You fool! He yelled at the flying god. At this point, Percy just shot his hands into the air and turned away from the rest of the room. Okay, this is just way too much crazy for me, he exclaimed as he started to leave, just for Annabeth and Thalia to grab him by his shirt. Wait, this is getting good, they said in unison, never taking their eyes off of the two. The son of the sea's eye began to twitch as he looked at his two companions. That was just freaky. Over with the king and master, Kurama kneeled in front of the bowing Zeus and clasped a hand onto his shoulder. Now, what did I teach you all those years ago? The blonde said to his godly protege. Zeus hesitantly looked up and began to tremble. To and not go back on my W words and always be faithful to those I love? He squeaked out, trying to keep his voice under control. Kurama nodded along with the words of the god before closing his eyes in a deadly smirk. And what did you do? All Zeus could do was gulp in fear. And then everything went black for the king of the gods. Kurama sighed as he stood up, shaking his fist out after punching out a god. After he finished working out the kinks in his hand, he turned back around to the rest of the room and took a deep breath. Hello! He called with a grand smile. Now, you all may be wondering who, what, why, where, and how at the moment, so let me explain. He started before looking to each of the gods, a large smirk playing across his face. A long pause left the gods in suspense. Until Artemis got fed up with it and blurted out for him. His name's Kurama. He's an immortal that's around the age of the primordials. She yelled, a sinister smirk formed on her face when she saw the blonde man deflate in defeat. You're no fun. You know that? Again, Chapter 8, Coward. A long pause left the gods in suspense. Until Artemis got fed up with it and blurted out for him. His name's Kurama. He's an immortal that's around the age of the primordials," she yelled. A sinister smirk formed on her face when she saw the blonde man deflate in defeat. "You're no fun. You know that? Don't care, this isn't a time for fun anyway," the goddess of the moon responded with a nonchalant shrug. Kurama's brow began to twitch in annoyance. "But the time for fun is always," he whined while flailing his arms in the air for emphasis. In the background Apollo and Hermes whooped in agreement, but were culled into silence by a stern look from Hera. Said Queen of the Gods finally decided to make her presence to the immortal known by standing from her throne and approaching the blonde man. "Now, Kurama, was it? I would like to ask you why my husband, and your king, seems so terrified of you at the moment, and how you came to enter our council room while it was sealed," Hera asked, a slight bit of ice gracing her tone, showing she wasn't in the kidding mood. Kurama, however, just smirked and looked back to his old student. "Well, ma'am, if you must know, little Zappy over there broke his O's, not just to you, but to me as well. And here I thought I raised him better, shame really. But, like all children, a little punishment will probably set him straight again," the blonde-haired immortal said before he began to chuckle darkly, taking slow steps towards the terrified king. "But," he said while stopping in mid-stride, "that must wait for later," Kurama said before taking a deep breath, and turning back to the still stunned demigods, or more specifically, Thalia and Annabeth. "I must go," he said in a low voice. He walked over to where Annabeth stood, a curious expression worked onto her face. "What?" she asked as he walked to stand in front of her. "You only just left your home, aren't you supposed to, and this all after I summoned you?" "Sorry little one, but I cannot stay for very long after being summoned. It would cause more trouble than good if I stayed at this time." "I also believe you dropped these," he said to the girl as he held out his hand. Annabeth looked at the man's hand and saw the same dagger he had given her all those years ago. The same dagger she had used ever since to defend herself from the hordes of monsters that haunted her every move, along with her cap of invisibility. As she took the blade from his hand, she felt a familiar palm place itself onto the top of her head. Looking up, she saw that same warm smile he wore the day she had to leave with Thalia. "And look. Remember little one throw, one prayer, and one moment, and I'll be there. And I hope you have finally learned from your dreams. Goodbye. See you later, Annabeth," he said before turning to Thalia. "You two have grown quite a bit since I last saw you. Keep with them, Thalia, they'll need you more than ever, so be prepared to take charge, and let your thunder roar," he said before turning to the last of the demigods. "Young man, I don't really know what to say to you. But, be good, I guess, whatever," he said with a nonchalant shrug before turning away from the son of Poseidon, leaving the teen with a deadpan expression and a roll of the boy's eyes. Annabeth leaped forward and wrapped the immortal in a hug before looking up at the taller man. "Don't go," she pleaded as she held onto him tighter. Kurama sighed before placing a hand on her head, a soft smile on his face. "Remember, only one throw, Annabeth. I'm not that far away. See ya," he said before his form was covered in a flash of gold, leaving the blonde-haired girl standing alone, a sad look still on her face. "I know. But you're still lonely there." Kurama reappeared in his cabin with a tired sigh. "Man, I haven't stretched my legs in so long. I feel so out of the shape," he whined as he slumped into his couch, brushing his bandaged hand through his hair with a tired sigh. "So, now that all of the theatrics are out of the way, it is good to see you again, Zeus," he said as he turned his head over the back of the couch to see the king of the gods standing behind him, a tired smile on the god's face as he walked around and sat next to his master. "Yes, it is very good to see you again, Jiki-sensei. Or should I call you Kurama-sensei now?" he said with a teasing smile as he nudged the immortal in the side with his elbow. The blonde chuckled as he shook his head lightly. "So how has Rehia been?" he asked the god, earning a smug grin from the man. "Oh? Is someone actually going to fill my mother's charms after not seeing her for 5,000 years?" he asked in a teasing voice, earning a deadpan expression from the blonde. "As if," he responded. "You know she tried to rape me, right? I don't need that kind of crazy in my life right now," he said as he got up from the couch. "You want something to drink?" he asked his old student as he made his way over to the kitchen fridge. Zeus snorted as he stood up and made his way over to the fridge as well. As long as it isn't any of that old ass egg, I'm up for one. Order knows I need one right now," he said before grumbling as he loosened up his shoulders. After waiting on Artemis in the council room, they were getting stiff from sitting in his throne for so long, and, for some reason, just being back in the sanctuary gave him the relaxed feeling he had missed for so long. Kurama sighed as he heard his students grumble, "The situation's that bad? Or are you just being a pussy about things like always and blowing them out of proportion?" he asked before handing the king a beer while laughing at his annoyed expression. "Okay, 1. Yes, it is that bad, and 2. I am the god of theater. I'm supposed to make things dramatic," he argued as he popped the top off with the flick of his thumb and took a drink from the bottle. Kurama chuckled and did the same before sighing. "So, what's going on?" he asked as they made their way back into the hearthroom. Zeus shook his head with a sigh as they both sank back into the couch. "It just so happens to be my bastard of a father again. No matter how much I protest, I see that he is indeed rising back again. I just don't want it to be true," he explained before mumbling the last part to himself, a sad look crossing his face as he took another large drink. Kurama nodded as he thought to himself on the situation. Troublesome. This isn't some one-off battle like the last time where you snuck in and hit him while he was down. No, this time he is gunning for you and making you play his own game, right?" he asked, trying to summarize the reason for Zeus' struggles. The king nodded as he finished off his bottle with another long drink. "Got it in one. But he's also using our own children against us to do so. Guess it's a bit of payback for him since we also used several of the Titan's kids to fight against him as well," he said before running a hand over his face with an exasperated grunt. "I fear he has us outplayed this time." Kurama snorted at his student and took his bottle to toss in away his bin. "Well, don't forget you've got an ace up your sleeve this time, Zapster. Annabeth will use my kunai again, and the next time she does, I will end things once and for all with that brat you call a father," he declared with a winning smirk, earning a smile from his student. Zeus stood and bowed to his sensei, lowering till he was almost at a 90-degree angle. "Arigato, sensei. I cannot express how grateful I am that you will assist us against father," he exclaimed loudly to his master. Kurama reached up and placed a hand on Zeus' hand, ruffling the god's hair like he had done millennia ago. "Don't worry, Zeus, I may have let you fight on your own first time, but now that he is coming back after not learning his lesson the first time, he will face his elders, learn from his mistakes." Zeus left later that day after a few more beers and a bit of banter between the two of them. Kurama sighed tiredly as he watched the god flash out of the sanctuary and walked back into his kitchen. He was reaching into his fridge for another beer when a voice cut him off. "Don't you think you're drinking a little much? I know you can't get drunk and all, but after 30 beers I thought you'd be done," Hestia said as she walked up behind him, her hands behind her back as she cocked her head to the side, giving him an expectant look. Kurama froze for a moment before closing the fridge without taking anything from it. I guess you're right about that. Kinda got lost in old memories, I guess. Been a while since I last saw old Zappy, you know," he said with a shrug, keeping his gaze from meeting the goddesses. "Do you want anything to drink?" he asked after a slight pause. The goddess of the heart thought for a moment while placing a finger on her chin. "No, I think I'm alright," she said before looking right at him with a raised eyebrow. "But you seem to be a little off. What's wrong?" she asked, moving a little closer to him. She was standing just inside of his comfort zone, and inching a little closer as she waited for an answer. But before she could get too close, Kurama quickly shook his head and moved around her and into the living room. "Nope, I'm good here," he said quickly as he moved out of the kitchen. A little too quickly, causing Hestia's eyes to narrow slightly. She turned to look at him but tilted her head slightly. "Really? 'Cause you seem a little jumpy?" Again Kurama shook head a little too quickly as he made his way towards his door. "Nah, just still have a little adrenaline going through me after fighting that stone guy. Just gotta meditate for a bit and I'll be fine," he said as he walked out of the cabin and towards the grand tree stump in the clearing. Hestia followed after the blonde, an interested look on her face. "Really? Alright then. Oh, before I forget, what was it you were going to say before you left to fight Atlas? You never got to finish," she asked as she followed behind him. She nearly bumped into him when he stopped abruptly. She staggered back a bit before looking at him in concern. Kurama froze when he heard her ask, "Tell her." He took a shuddering breath as he tried to calm himself. He slowly turned towards the goddess and took a long breath. "Hestia, I just said," he paused, shifting his gaze from her slightly blushing face to the ground. I can't thank you enough for spending so much time with this old man for these past few years. So, thanks. Love you, but I just can't go through that hell again." Hestia watched Kurama as he slowly turned to face her. He took a long breath, and Hestia felt that strange feeling come over her again. It felt warm, but also like she was anxious about something. She was both happy and terrified at the same time, and for being a several millennia-year-old goddess who had never felt something even close to this before, was strange to say the least. "Hestia," Kurama began to say, before a conflicted look came across his face. A light dusting of pink came across the goddess's face as she listened to him speak. "Yes?" She saw Kurama swallow nervously before trying to continue. He said to her, making her lean a little forward slightly, intent on understanding what he was trying to say, and just what it had to do with this feeling in her chest. "What is it?" And with his next words, the feeling in her chest died in a sudden stop that she couldn't comprehend what had happened. "Can't thank you enough for spending so much time spending with this old man. So, thanks." She leaned back slightly, taken aback, not able to respond as quickly as she would have liked. "Oh, well, you're welcome, Kurama. It was my pleasure. But I need to go. I think my brother wanted to have another meeting after he was done here. So I need to go," she said before finishing quickly and flashing away in a brilliant golden light. Kurama blinked a few times before backing up to the nearest tree, resting his back against it and slowly sliding down to the ground. He ran his hands through his hair and looked up into the sky and shook his head. "I'm such a coward. First I abandoned my duties out of fear I miss out on raising my own children. And I'm too scared to try again. I'm such a fucking coward. What should I do, Kurama? What should I do?" he questioned himself, his eyes dulling as he watched the setting sun. "That's right, I'm alone again and I'm too pathetic to try not be such a goddamn coward." I hope you all liked the video. And if you all want the next part of this video, please like the video and comment 3 hearts. Please subscribe to my channel so whenever I upload a video you will notify.